Something chose you to be here, not an algorithm, not a lucky click. According to Carl Jung, there is a figure living in the deepest layer of your unconscious mind. She is not the force itself. She is the ultimate realization of it, the highest thing a human psyche can reach toward. Jung called her Sophia, and if you are watching this right now, she may have already found you. But here is the part that will shock you. You may not survive the meeting unchanged. What does it mean when the highest expression of inner wisdom reaches out to you? Jung spent decades trying to answer that question. What he found inside the human mind was not a comfort. It was a confrontation, a reckoning so total that some people never came back from it the same. And that is exactly why most people never get to experience it at all. Think about the last time you felt a pull towards something you could not explain, a voice inside you that was not exactly yours, a knowing that arrived before any logic did. You called it a gut feeling. Jung called it something far older, far more dangerous, and far more beautiful than any gut feeling has a right to be. That pull, that knowing, that is Sophia knocking on the door of your unconscious. And today, we are going to open it together. Carl Jung was one of the greatest minds in the history of psychology. He studied the human soul the way others study the stars. He wanted to know what lived in the deep places of the mind, the places we never look because we are afraid of what we might find. And in those depths, again and again, across cultures, across centuries, across every kind of human being, he kept finding the same figure. She had many names: Isis in Egypt, Athena in Greece, Mary in the Christian world. But Jung used the oldest name of all. He called her Sophia, and he was careful never to call her a fairy tale. Jung described Sophia as the archetype of the greatest universality. That is not a poetic phrase. It is a precise psychological statement. In Jung's map of the psyche, the deepest organizing force is what he called the self. Think of it as the totality of everything you are and everything you could become. And Sophia is the bridge to it. She is the highest stage of what Jung called the Anima, the inner, feminine figure that lives inside every person regardless of gender. She is not the foundation. She is the destination, the final, most luminous expression of the unconscious reaching toward wholeness. She is a pattern built into the human mind itself, the same way hunger is built into the body. You do not decide to feel hunger. It finds you. Sophia works the same way. She does not wait for an invitation. She waits for readiness. Here is where things get uncomfortable, because Jung also said that Sophia was not just beautiful, she was demanding. Her wisdom did not come as a warm feeling or a gentle nudge. It came as a crisis, a collapse, a moment when everything you thought you knew fell apart, and in the rubble, something real finally had room to grow. Consider a composite narrative drawn from patterns Jung observed across many of his patients, the kind of story that repeated itself so often, he built an entire theory around it. Picture someone in their late 30s. They have done everything right by every standard the world gave them. Good career, stable life, respectable choices. And one ordinary Tuesday morning, they wake up and they cannot move. Not from paralysis, from meaninglessness. Everything they built feels like a costume, and underneath the costume, they have no idea who they are. Jung saw this kind of crisis again and again. He did not call it a breakdown. He called it the beginning of individuation, the moment Sophia stops whispering and starts shouting. This is what makes the Sophia archetype so different from anything modern self-help will ever sell you. Modern self-help says your life should feel good. Jung said your life should feel real, and real often does not feel good. Real feels like a fire burning down everything that was never truly yours. Jung wrote extensively about this in what he called the process of individuation. It is the lifelong journey of becoming who you actually are, not who your parents needed you to be, not who your culture approved of, not who your fear let you become, who you actually are. And Sophia is the guide for that journey. But she is not a gentle guide. She is more like a midwife. A midwife does not make the birth easy. She makes sure you survive it. And here is where we have to ask the question that makes this whole topic genuinely dangerous. What if Sophia finds you before you have the tools to handle what she brings? Jung spent years watching people get close to this encounter, feel its heat, and then run. They would rationalize it, medicate it, throw themselves into work or relationships that kept them safely on the surface of their own lives. And he noticed something disturbing. The running never actually worked. It just changed the form of the pain. Because Sophia is patient in a way that time cannot outlast. She does not get tired. She simply waits. And the longer you wait to meet her consciously, the more forcefully she tends to arrive when she finally does. Now here is the part that even many Jung scholars hesitate to discuss openly. Jung believed that Sophia is not just a psychological concept. She is something you encounter, something that meets you. He described her in his personal journals, particularly in his Red Book, a document he kept hidden for nearly a century because it was too raw, too strange, too real to share while he lived. In the Red Book, Jung wrote about descending into his own unconscious and meeting figures there. Figures who spoke to him, challenged him, wounded him, guided him. One of those figures was unmistakably Sophia. He called her by different names in different visions, but her quality was always the same. She carried wisdom that was not comfortable. She asked things of him that he was not sure he could give, and every time he turned away from her, his outer life became more hollow, more chaotic, more suffocating. What makes this so important is that Jung was not a fragile person. He was a practicing psychiatrist treating some of the most severe psychological cases in early 20th century Europe. He had studied under Freud, the most celebrated mind in psychology at the time. He had status, training, discipline, and intellect in enormous supply. And still, Sophia broke him open. Still, the encounter with his own inner depths brought him to his knees. He recorded in the Red Book that during those years from roughly 1913 to 1919, he was genuinely afraid he was losing his mind. Empaths aren't broken, they're alchemists in progress. The alchemist's path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook, in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com. The images that came were so powerful, so strange, so overwhelming that he could not always tell whether they were creative visions or signs of psychosis. What saved him, he believed, was his outer life. His patients needed him. His family grounded him. He kept his practice running, kept showing up, kept one foot in the ordinary world, even as the other foot descended into the deep. He called this his container. The structure of his daily life held him steady, while the inner world tried to pull him under. He worked through it by doing what he later recommended to everyone. He wrote it down. He drew it. He painted it. He stayed in contact with the images, rather than fighting them or fleeing from them. He gave Sophia his full attention instead of his back. And on the other side of that confrontation, he built one of the most complete and useful maps of the human psyche that has ever existed. He did not come out of the Sophia encounter with a theory. He came out of it with knowledge, real knowledge, the kind that lives in the body, not just the mind, the kind that changes how you walk through a room, not just how you talk about psychology. This is the pattern Jung noticed in the people he worked with too. The ones who turned away from the Sophia encounter, who patched themselves up and got back to normal, who chose the anesthetic of busyness over the fire of self-knowing. These people got sick, not always physically. Sometimes it was their relationships that died slowly. Sometimes it was their creativity that dried up. Sometimes it was just a grey fog that moved in over every good thing in their life and never quite lifted. And the ones who leaned into the encounter, the ones who let Sophia break them open, they became extraordinary. Not in a loud public way, in the way of people who have been to the bottom and found solid ground there. They carried a quality that Jung called being grounded in the self, and people around them could feel it without knowing what they were feeling. You have met someone like this, someone who makes the room feel steadier just by being in it, someone whose presence asks something of you without them saying a word. Jung observed this quality so consistently that he began to document what it looked like from the outside. These individuals listened differently than most people listen, not waiting for their turn to speak, but actually absorbing what was in front of them. They could sit with ambiguity without needing to resolve it. They could be wrong without it threatening their sense of who they were. And they had a particular relationship with silence. Not awkward silence, full silence. The kind where something is being communicated that words would only dilute. Jung called this the quality of the individuated person, not a destination you arrive at and stay, more like a direction than a place. And Sophia was the compass. That is what the Sophia encounter produces when you survive it well. But surviving it well is not guaranteed. And this is where we need to talk about the shadow side of the Sophia archetype, the part that is not shown on inspirational posters and is not sold in weekend seminars. Jung identified a phenomenon he called archetypal possession. It happens when the encounter with an archetype goes wrong, when, instead of the ego meeting Sophia and being changed by her, the ego is instead swallowed by her. The person stops experiencing the wisdom from inside themselves. They start believing they are the wisdom. They start to think they are chosen in a way that sets them above others. They start to feel like a prophet, a messenger, a special vessel of truth that ordinary people cannot understand. A narrative illustration drawn from the composite of Jung's clinical work shows us exactly what this looks like. Consider a profile of someone who begins a genuine spiritual awakening. Real inner work, real transformation. For a time they are radiant with it. The people around them feel the change. Something has truly happened. But then, quietly and almost invisibly, the ego begins to absorb the experience, instead of being shaped by it. The person starts to speak with a certainty that brooks no challenge. They start to see those who disagree with them, not as people with different perspectives, but as unconscious, as unawakened, as obstacles. The wisdom that was transforming them begins to inflate them instead. Jung called this inflation. He said it was one of the most dangerous states a human being could enter, because the inflated person is still using the language of wisdom, still talking about growth and truth and consciousness. But underneath the language, the ego has grabbed the wheel. And Sophia, the real Sophia, has gone quiet. The test, Jung said, is humility, not performed humility. Not the kind where someone says, "I am nothing," while their eyes say, "I am everything." Real humility. The kind that can say, "I was wrong." The kind that can sit with not knowing. The kind that does not need to be the most conscious person in the room. Because Sophia, the real Sophia, does not make you feel superior to other people. She makes you feel more connected to them. She breaks down the walls between you and the rest of humanity, not because it feels nice, but because she is showing you the truth. That the loneliness you carried was never real. That the separation you felt was a story the ego told, and that underneath every person you have ever judged or dismissed, there is a soul on the same impossible, beautiful journey you are on. And this is the part that most people miss when they start studying Jung. They read about the shadow, they nod along, they think, "Yes, I have a dark side, I acknowledge that," and they file it away as understood. But Jung would tell you that intellectually accepting the shadow is not the same as actually integrating it, not even close. Here is where the distinction matters. The shadow is its own encounter. It is a distinct, earlier stage of individuation. It is the confrontation with everything you have rejected, buried, or refused to see in yourself. That is not Sophia's job to hand you. Her job is harder and more important than that. Sophia is the wisdom that makes the shadow confrontation survivable. She is the light you carry into the darkest room. Without her, the shadow material overwhelms you. You either collapse under it, or you project it outward and blame the world for what lives inside you. But with Sophia as your guide, the same darkness becomes something you can sit with, learn from, and eventually integrate. Integration means sitting across from the version of yourself you most want to disown and staying in the room with it. The envious part, the manipulative part, the part that sometimes wants people to fail, the part that has been cruel and told itself it was justified. Most people can acknowledge these things exist in the abstract. Very few can stay present with the actual felt reality of them long enough for real change to happen. And it is Sophia, the wisdom archetype, who gives you the steadiness to stay. This is the climax of the Sophia encounter. This is the moment that shocks people who thought they were prepared for it. You expect enlightenment to feel like arriving somewhere elevated, like climbing a mountain and looking down at the people below. Jung says it is nothing like that. The Sophia encounter feels more like the mountain dissolving under your feet and finding out you were on the ground the whole time, the ground of your own real nature, the ground of shared human experience, the ground of a love so large it does not need to be deserved. Jung drew a distinction between two principles he saw operating in the human psyche. He called them logos and eros. Logos is logic, reason, and differentiation. Eros is connection, feeling, image, and relational knowing. And here is what most people get wrong. Jung did not say these belong to men and women respectively. He said every person contains both, and that the path to Sophia runs through the eros principle regardless of who you are. The pictorial, symbolic, feeling first way of knowing that arrives as an image before it arrives as a thought. Most of us were trained out of this way of knowing before we were 10 years old. School rewarded the answer, not the wonder. Work rewarded the output, not the listening. And so, this deeper knowing went quiet in us. But she did not disappear. She went underground. She started speaking in the only language left available to her. Dreams, symptoms, accidents that were not quite accidents. Relationships that kept teaching the same lesson until you finally learned it. Moments of inexplicable grief in the middle of perfectly fine days. These were not signs that something was wrong with you. These were Sophia, still at the door, still patient, still waiting. And here is the resolution that Jung arrived at after a lifetime of working with this. You do not need to go searching for Sophia. You do not need to travel to a sacred site, or read the right books, or find the right teacher. You need to do something much harder and much simpler than any of that. You need to stop running from the things inside yourself that you most do not want to face. The grief you buried, the anger you made polite, the longing you decided was not allowed, the truth you chose not to speak, the version of yourself you gave up on because someone told you it was too much. These are the locked rooms in the house of the psyche, and Sophia lives in the rooms you refuse to enter. Jung developed what he called active imagination as a way of meeting these contents consciously. You sit with what is inside you. You give it attention. You let it speak instead of drowning it in noise and productivity. You treat your own inner life the way you would treat a person who has been waiting a long time to be heard. And what rises up? From that encounter, that is the beginning of the Sophia experience. It sounds deceptively simple. It is not. Most people cannot sit with their own inner life for more than 30 seconds before they reach for their phone. Before they make a list, check something, scroll past something, manufacture some friction between themselves and the quiet. Because the quiet is where Sophia lives, and Sophia asks things, and we are afraid of what she might ask us. She might ask you to leave something you have outgrown. She might ask you to return to something you abandoned. She might ask you to tell the truth to someone you have been lying to for years, including yourself. She might ask you to grieve something you decided was not worth grieving. These are not small requests. These are the requests that reorganize a life. But Jung was insistent on this point. The requests that feel most impossible are almost always the ones most necessary. The places we most resist are the places most in need of our presence. The Sophia encounter asks you to become equal to your own depth. And that equality does not come cheap. It costs you the version of yourself built on avoidance. It costs you the comfortable story. It costs you the pleasant, manageable life that was never quite alive. And what you find there will not always be comfortable. You will find your shadow, the parts of yourself projected onto others, the selfishness you called realism, the cowardice you called caution, the cruelty you did not let yourself see because it was wrapped in the language of reason. But you will also find something else, something that has been there longer than any of the damage, a self that is whole, a self that was never actually broken, a self that Sophia has been trying to return you to since the first moment you were old enough to start forgetting it. This is what Jung meant when he wrote that the psyche is a paradoxical structure in which the way in is simultaneously the way out. The descent into the darkness of your own inner world is not a journey away from life. It is a journey back to the source of your life, to the place where you feel connected to something larger than your name and your history and your fears. Sophia does not choose perfect people. She does not choose people who have it together. She chooses people who are ready to stop pretending. People who have carried the weight of their unlived life long enough that they are finally willing to set it down. People who can hear the knock at the door of the unconscious and instead of turning up the television, decide to answer it. Jung identified the Anima as the carrier of Sophia within the individual psyche. He said she develops through stages. At first she appears as pure instinct, raw biological drive. Then she becomes a romantic ideal, projected onto another person. Then she becomes something more subtle, a spiritual companion, an inner guide. And at her highest development, she becomes Sophia herself, the figure of complete wisdom, the integration of every human quality, light and dark, tender and fierce, knowing and receptive. This final stage is not achieved by reading about it. It is achieved by living through it, by surviving the encounters that break the earlier stages open and refusing to stop at the comfortable ones. If you recognized yourself somewhere in what you heard today, that recognition is not an accident. That is exactly how Sophia works. She does not announce herself with thunder. She announces herself with a quiet, certain feeling that something said was true. A kind of inner yes that you felt before your mind could agree or disagree. That yes, that is the beginning. Jung spent his entire career saying the same thing in 100 different ways. The greatest tragedy in human life is not suffering. It is the unlived life. The life tucked away because it felt too risky, too strange, too much. Sophia is the force in the human soul that will not let you settle for that. She will keep creating friction. She will keep sending dreams and crises and longings, not to punish you, to point you home. You are not here by accident. The part of you that seeks this kind of depth, that is drawn to questions with no easy answers, that feels the pull of something larger than the life you were handed, that is not a flaw. That is the most alive part of you, and it has been trying to lead you somewhere real for a long time. The question is not whether Sophia has chosen you. The question is whether you are ready to choose her back. If you are sitting with something right now, some feeling, some recognition, some question you did not have before you started watching, do not rush past it. Sit with it. Let it be there. Resist the urge to explain it away or file it neatly into something you already know. Just be with it, the way you would sit with a fire. That is the practice. That is the beginning of everything Jung spent his life pointing toward. In The Alchemist's Path, perception training for empaths, you'll turn overwhelm into wisdom with practical drills, Jung-inspired boundaries, and step-by-step perception training. This guide includes 3 exclusive chapter videos to deepen each lesson. Written by Surreal Mind, 236 pages, beautifully designed 8.5 by 11 downloadable ebook, in stock now. Start your training today. Feel deeply while thinking clearly. Get The Alchemist's Path at thesurrealmind.com.